Okay, so last year, I kind of brought it home. I'm going to do it again this year. And we're going to reach out like we did last year. So we're going to sort of reach for the further reaches of well-being. As I think most of you know, what I research and what we research here, and what started sort of this whole TransTech thing, was research into something called persistent non-symbolic experience, which is also known as enlightenment, non-duality, persistent mystical experience. We have 200 terms or so cataloged for it at this point. What I think is interesting is that almost everyone, is there anybody in here that doesn't know this pyramid? That has like never seen Maslow's pyramid before? It's okay to admit it. Right? So basically everybody knows this pyramid, right? And if you don't have to answer this, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or anything, but in the back of your mind, when you look at this pyramid, do you think to yourself, yeah, you know, I'm pretty much at the esteem level? Probably not, right? Everybody in here probably thinks, just like, you know, more than 50% of people think they're smarter than half the population. Everybody in here probably thinks that they're at the self-actualization level, right? Now, in reality, everybody in this room probably is above 50% in terms of intelligence of the population, right? And maybe you are all at the self-actualization level. But one thing that you might not realize is that in 1967, Maslow had a heart attack. He was living out here in Palo Alto, California. And when he had his heart attack, he had a profound shift in his consciousness. And that shifted him into what we call persistent non-symbolic experience. Remember, he was famous for the term peak experience. And so he needed a term that was like peak experience, that sort of fit his way of describing things. So guess what he called PNSE? You have peaks and you have plateaus. So he called it the plateau experience, and he changed his pyramid, his oh-so-famous pyramid, to make self-actualization the second highest level. So if you were all really happy that you were self-actualized a minute ago, I've got some news for you. There's another rung on the ladder to climb, up to self-transcendence. It was interesting, if you think about it, self-actualization is like being the best individual that you can possibly be. And one of the paradoxes that existed in his work for all of those years was that the people who were the best also had these moments of peak experience where they transcended themselves. And it's kind of weird. That's an odd paradox, right? Like, how can that be the highest level, self-actualization, right? And yet the thing that makes it the highest level is that you're having these periodic self-transcending moments. But he just really didn't sort of run across this notion of persistence until it hit him. So that's what we study. And we've been studying that for over 10 years at this point. Initially, we started by studying it with over 1,000 people. We've done it with all kinds of different methods all over the world at this point. There's 3 terms that you should be aware of. The first one is the one that I've been using, persistent non-symbolic experience. That just means you've been experiencing something like this for more than a year. A second one, ongoing non-symbolic experience, means that you've been experiencing it for less than a year. If you're thinking to yourself, why in the world would there be 2 terms for that? It's because when we first started researching this, our definition was that you had to be in it for more than a year. And now we're able to shift people into it. And so they're not in it for more than a year, so we needed something else to call them. So we made up the second term of ongoing non-symbolic experience, and then the third one, temporary non-symbolic experience, which is kind of like the classic Maslow thing, where you're having the peak experiences, essentially. I'm not going to go over this work today. I've talked about it tons. There's a zillion videos out there on it. There's papers on it, all of that. You can go to nonsymbolic.org. But basically what shook out of all of that work was a definition of the different types of this experience and sort of an understanding of how people progressed from one to the next, regardless of their, you know, tradition or no tradition, belief in God or atheism, doesn't really matter. Essentially, it all sort of falls along this continuum. Well, the problem with talking to people who are already there is that you have no idea what they were like before they transitioned. And so at a certain point, it became very important to us to try to understand who someone was before they had their shift so that we could really understand what happened to them on the other side of their shift and how they developed from there. So we started a brand new series of experiments, and that's what you see up here. So we have what was originally a 12, actually it was originally a 6, then a 12, then a 14. It's currently like an 18-week protocol, so it just keeps kind of getting added to as we build in more safety and more reliability and stuff like that. The core stuff that works just takes 6 weeks, but if you want it to work safely and whatnot, you have to kind of stretch that out a little bit more, right? It's a mix of gold standard positive psychology practices and the best methods that rose to the top from all of those really thousands of people that we researched, and not just the initial 1,200. And so these are basically the gold standard methods that work for a majority of people. But when I say a majority of people, I don't mean that a method can work for a majority of people. It turns out in our research that a method might work for, a really successful method might work for like 8% of people at any given time. And so you really need sort of a cocktail, and you need to help people find the methods that work for them and whatnot at any given time. So it's called the Finder's Course because you're finding the method that works for you. That was the original reason for that name. It's delivered online. People can do it in their home. We had 4 experimental cohorts that this data is drawn from. We've since had many, many more experimental cohorts. We're running FC9 right now. So this is just FC4. I consider FC4 our classic experiment where it reached statistical significance and the data and stuff like that. And then we really tried to break the protocol quite a bit sort of after that. These were the results of the first 4, so you can see the different classifications and where people fell across them. You would expect more people in the earlier than the later. So location 1 is sort of an earlier form of PNSE. Location 4, for instance, is a later form. Notice that we didn't expect people to go beyond 4 initially. So in the earlier Finder's courses in 1 and 2, we didn't even have a 4+ category for people to select if they'd gone beyond that. And then we realized, okay, people are doing that. We better add that category in there. So you can see the results were pretty crazy. And again, I've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to dwell on it. There's a lot of data out there. If you wonder, well, what are the psychological benefits of this? This shows you some of the psychological benefits associated with that. For those of you who are clinicians or psychologists or whatever in the room, you're probably looking at this going, holy cow, those are pretty big moves. And they are pretty big moves. That's everybody who took the course. Here's the interesting slide. This is the difference between the people who took the course and didn't transition to ongoing non-symbolic experience and the people that took the course and did transition to ongoing non-symbolic experience. And there's one really fascinating, I mean, there's amazing things here, right? So to help you read this, right? So percent of time happy, they were 50% happier than the people who just took the course, who already got a lot happier than they were before, right? And so you can see then it's basically 74 or so % of the time they rated themselves happy versus 50% of the time for people who were in weren't in ongoing non-symbolic experience by the end. Depersonalization is the big one. Look at the depersonalization number there. Now, depersonalization is like the scary clinical term because it's really only been defined clinically in a classic sense. But if you think about ongoing non-symbolic experience, if you think about what people represent when they're experiencing this, it sounds a lot like what psychologists and whatnot call depersonalization and disassociation. Turns out there's a positive version, as there often is in psychology, right? So for every bad thing in psychology, there's a good thing, and they often look just like mirror images of each other. Well, it turns out there's a good version of depersonalization, and that's essentially what this persistent non-symbolic experience stuff is. So if you look at this, you know, a depersonalized person, a friend of mine runs the main depersonalized clinic in London. So he has hundreds of people, hundreds of patients from all around the UK. His people are suicidal, you know, they're terribly depressed. They're absolutely the most miserable people that you can possibly imagine, right? Yet, if you give them a measure, they come up as depersonalized. Our people, you give them a measure, they come up as depersonalized, but they come up as essentially the happiest people in the world, right? So there's this interesting mirror where the clinicians that were catching this population, but they were missing the healthy version of it, as this so often happened because in psychology, you only get paid to find the bad stuff for the most part. And we'll talk about how we got around that in just a minute. So this is what this was, basically. This was the largest crowdsourced, crowd-funded PNSE consciousness experiment ever done. It's still ongoing. If you think about it, National Institutes of Health, they're never going to give you money for this kind of stuff, right? I mean, basically, none of the classic funding sources are ever going to pay for this type of research. So what we did is we turned it into a class, and we basically sold it as a class, and we were able to raise so far about $600,000 from those class fees to do this research. Now, before you say to yourself, do you have a Ferrari outside? Wow, that's a great deal, right? Let me tell you that we often miss on our estimates. Like, so FC9, for instance, it was brand new. I'll tell you about some stuff that we added into it. I think we charged somebody that's in the room from FC9. I know we have people here. You can maybe refresh my memory. We charged maybe $2,000, $2,500. I am personally paying right now about $130 for each person who took that course because we misbudgeted on some of the shipping and some of the devices, right? And so it's great that this helps out, but the reality is that we've put in a lot of money from outside to get these going and to keep them going as well. So far, out of my own pocket, I've spent about $7,000 on FC9. And that's still going up as the weeks go on because we have to send them our electrodes and stuff like that. All right, so what's next? This is what I'm excited to talk about today because we're halfway through, we're a little bit over halfway through FC9. And FC9 has been an incredibly successful test of using biometrics. All right, so if you could read that slide, I don't know how well you can read it from back there on these screens, you'll see that basically what we've added in is biometrics, and we've added in these two biometrics. So we're using GSR and we're using heart rate, and they're going through Neuromore's application. So everything is going through a smartphone. You literally attach the electrodes to your fingers before you meditate, you put on the heart strap, you launch the Neuromore app, and it collects that data, sends it to the cloud, we download the data, we analyze the data, and it's gone so well that we've decided to extend it beyond the 60-person pilot that we're currently running right now, and we're going to have a 2,000-person trial soon. So for the 2,000-person trial, we're going to add in Muse, the brain-sensing headband stuff that you've seen around here. So we're super excited about that. If you think about that, that's pretty much the trifecta of TransTech at the moment, right? Brainwaves, GSR, heart rate. So that's going to be an amazing experiment, I think. We're going to add in some other people, like I'm sure we'll probably get some additional analysis from Tim Mullen's company. We're going to potentially work with the Sensi people who are here. We've done some testing with them already in FC9. They're doing like a psychophysical thing where you shake your phone, which is pretty cool, and there's some interesting data that's coming out of that. We're probably going to work with Beyond Verbal and do some testing of the voice and things like that. We're basically looking for any signature we can find that relates to persistent non-symbolic experience that we might be able to use to help people get to that place faster and more reliable and safer, right? Although you might think the statistics are great for Finder's course, if you think about 4 months of work, it's literally 4 months. Right? And it's 4 months at a minimum of an hour and a half a day. It goes to 2.5 hours, then somewhere around 3 hours, and that's where it plateaus out. That's a lot of effort, right? So that's not something that's going to scale to billions of people. We think it's this type of stuff, fishing around in these signals and such, at a large, large scale that can be mined with machine learning and AI tools, even beyond that, natural language processing and all of that, that are really going to take us there and that are going to find some stuff in there. And we also think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit before you ever get there, right? So imagine the notion of, for instance, something like precision meditation. And I want to thank, I'm just going to put this slide up here, I want to thank these collaborators who are helping out with this. And we have a lot of the best people in the world helping with these projects, and we really appreciate it. If you think about precision meditation, right now, one of the main barriers to adopting a meditation practice for you is figuring out which one of those work. So here's what we see in our research. Basically, someone goes out to meditate, and they say, geez, I feel like I should meditate. I keep reading about this. Hey, Nick, do you meditate? What meditation technique do you use? Oh, okay, great, thanks. I'm going to look into that one. Mikey, do you meditate? What meditation technique? Okay, maybe, right? Now, maybe I'll try Mikey's, or maybe I'll try Nick's. Maybe Mikey's will seem a little too far out, or Nick's will seem a little too far out or something, right? And so I'll give one a try. Chances are, I already said, the hit rate's pretty low, right? So chances are I'm not going to be wowed the first time I sit down to do that meditation. The odds of me getting lucky on a match off of a random ask of my friend or whatever are pretty low, right? So odds are I'm going to bounce off of meditation, and I'm going to say to Mikey, thanks for that tip, Mikey, but that meditation stuff is just not for me. It's just it's just thanks though, right? Or thanks, Nick, but It's just not for me. Maybe I'll try another one. Probably I won't try another one. Maybe I'll try another one eventually. And so we see sort of this consumption pattern around meditation. Imagine a different situation than that, right? Imagine a situation where you can put on some electrodes, you can put on a Muse headband, you can put on a heart strap, whatever it winds up, you can use your voice. I don't care what it winds up being. You can shake your phone with Sensi. Who cares what it is, right? Whichever one of these things shakes out, no pun intended to the Sensi guys, whichever one of these things shakes out, right? And you know which meditation method you should use. But not only that, but the biometrics are able to say, oh, hey, you know, but you should only use that one to relax. You should use this other one for focusing. Oh, and oh, by the way, don't bother using it for 26 minutes. 24, 25 minutes. You don't really get any benefit after that. Whereas another person might be told, you better use it for 43 minutes. Otherwise, you might as well have never done it. Right? Oh, and by the way, you should do it in the morning or the evening. By the way, you should only do it a few times a week, whatever. We expect all of this type of data to be accessible from this mass data collection effort. All right? So that's what we're working on, basically. It's like sort of the first precision meditation, TransTech type thing. And I'm doing a specific and kind of special appeal here today, and here's why. Across the parking lot, I think you've probably seen that we have a lab, and we have a high-density EEG system in that lab. And so I'm looking for as many people that are willing to inconvenience themselves in the San Francisco area as possible to participate in a program. I'd really, really love to get some folks who are willing to come down and do a high-density EEG measurement and some really high-resolution biophysical stuff before the next Finder's course. And then after, I'm going to assume that you're one of the 70 or 80% of people who have a successful program. And then after, you kind of have a transition to ongoing non-symbolic experience, and then again at the end of the program. I would love to have some high-resolution data to go along with the lower resolution data from like the Muse and the GSR and the heart rate and stuff like that. And so if you're interested in that, I have a very sort of special deal for you. If you go to thefinderscourse.com, and for the video I've left this off, but if you after that slash put a TT, you will see a special sign-up page. If you sign up there, that will let me know that you're willing to help out with this, and we'll do something very special for those of you who are willing to be slightly inconvenienced by coming down to the lab. Okay, the other thing that I want to announce before we break for our awesome breakout sessions is a new program that we're starting here at Sophia University with actually Deepak Chopra. So how many people here have heard of Deepak Chopra? He's an author, kind of. Okay, you never know. I have people raise their hands in some crowds, and they're like, who's that, right? You just never know what crowd's going to know who. So about, I don't know, earlier this year, Deepak basically said, I want to do a program in transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies. I want to do a program that basically focuses on actual transformation, producing actual transformation, helping people contextualize it, and then actually helping them go out and make impact in the world. And so we're basically doing that program. It's going to be a who's who of instruction. If you think about how many people I know in a community like this, you think of how many people Deepak knows, and you put those two things together, and you wind up with basically a faculty of teachers that's just phenomenal, really. It's just nothing like it. I can't imagine there's ever going to be anything like it again. This is going to be the structure of it. You can see the first track there. If you can't make out what the yellow says, it says spirit. So that first track is literally, those first two classes are literally the Finder's course. And so that first track is all about actually producing transformation. The second track is and the second track is very empirical. It's very rigorous. This is not like some sort of woo-woo, wisdom-y type track. We're going to have the best scientists and the best thinkers in this space from all around the world doing things like fundamentals of transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies and the neuroscience of it and all of that. So there's a wisdom track that basically helps you to contextualize that. And then there's an impact track, a third track that's an impact track. This one, I just picked one of them. There's three of them. I couldn't fit them all on the slide. So this one is a thought leader track. A lot of people that come to Sophia want to make an impact in the world as like a yoga teacher or a center owner or a clinician of some kind, or a writer, or a speaker, or whatever. And I was trying to think, what do these people all have in common? And the thing that they all have in common, if you really think about it in terms of what impacts their success, is their ability to be a thought leader. It's their ability to actually get on a stage somewhere. And if you've ever tried to, have a career as a thought leader or whatever, it's actually not that hard. You just have to be consistent, and you have to work certain formulas, and then you're going to be speaking at the next TransTech conference or whatever, right? It's not that much of a challenge to do, but there's very few people that teach you how to do it. So we're going to have some of the best thought leaders in the world helping people to sort through what area of thought leadership they want to be in, and then we're going to use some of the best courses out there to actually help people do that. A second track is for corporate people, so it's for organizational transformation, and that's not on the slide, couldn't fit it. So we're going to have a lot of the very best people in the world come together for an organizational track as well, because there's a lot of people who are embedded in organizations at very high levels. Ivy's talk was a great example of this, and Nicole's questions to her were, great as well. If you think about it, she's like, how in the world did you pull this off, right? I mean, there were like these questions like, how in the world, at Mattel, how did you pull this off? I know somebody else who had Ivy's job at Mattel, he didn't pull that off, right? How in the world did you pull that off? And so, we really want to help people to figure out how to pull that off, how to do this successfully, how to successfully transform these organizations. We spend a lot of time at work. Work has a lot of our work and our jobs and our companies and our organizations and whatever, they have a huge impact on the world, much less the employees. And so that's an important track. The third one is a research track. And so there will also be a research track in the program. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll cut the end of this slide off. And so you can see, I think, the full URL there. But thank you very much. And thank you very, very much for coming to the TransTech conference and making the conference so awesome this year. It's you guys who make this conference so incredible. And so, again, thank you so much. And now you are in for an absolute treat, because we're to another part of the big community part of the program, which is when we break people out by interest area with some of the very best people in each interest. So I'm going to turn that back over to Nicole.